Here's my first impressions on the first 2 episodes of The World Ends With You, the animation. Why did I wait for episode 2 to drop? First, I wanted to think about episode 1 a bit for a somewhat more measured take, but mainly I wanted to see how episode 2 would handle a specific scene before passing judgment. So be warned, this review has spoilers for what we've seen so far, and a couple very general allusions to future events in the game. And oh boy am I glad I waited for the second episode, because my opinion after watching it is almost entirely different from the first episode. Waiting a week also got the OP and ED, which I normally wouldn't care too much about, but for a series with a killer soundtrack, they are very important. Let's start with by far my biggest issue after watching just episode 1, dramatic presentation. I've heard similar complaints about other anime adaptations of games, but those don't mean it's still not an issue here. It's a 20-hour game that had to be condensed into a 5-hour show, and episode 1 basically felt like a recap episode rather than actually being the start of a story. I was especially not optimistic after how Mr. H's first scene went. This guy's called Mr. H, by the way. They haven't said his name in the show yet, but his name is not really important to them. His scene saving Shiki from Neku on day 2 felt like it happened because that's the plot and it needed to be included. Again, like a recap episode. There's no dramatic tension. There's been no time at this point to become attached to any of the main characters in the anime, because it's been all breathless explanation of this is the Reaper's game, we're gonna fight these things, and blah blah blah, just getting through plot point by plot point. And this is despite the presentation of this scene in particular probably being a bit better than the actual game. There's just been no characterization yet. In the game, there's an annoying way of presenting scenes. You're shown the start of a conversation, but then the game cuts ahead to the next day, and then you learn the important info that the characters already heard from this conversation in a flashback later. This is how Mr. H saving Shiki works, as well as probably a dozen other scenes, and I am glad the anime does not do this. But the anime does do entirely unnecessary flashbacks to a couple minutes earlier in the same episode. We know people get erased, and we know that Neku knows that people get erased. We just saw it. There's so little space to breathe in episode 1, please use that time for anything else. But then there's episode 2, which seems to set about fixing episode 1 almost immediately. The first several minutes are just character interaction, which was so welcome after I spent the first episode wondering why I was even supposed to care about anyone here. I know the story already, but after episode 1 I didn't think anyone who didn't know the story could possibly get invested with how things were going. Episode 2 has Shiki's backstory, and it's handled with actual nuance and dramatic weight. Compared to episode 1, which was full of stupid stuff, the only really stupid bit of episode 2 is Neku going, "Whoa, I'm dead?" I don't care that that wasn't actually already established, it's just so incredibly obvious that all the main cast is dead. And I guess it's weird that there's a dramatic scene of erasing the last few Nois in day 4, after Neku was easily fighting many more Nois for several minutes by himself. But those are small nitpicks after episode 1, which I could go through and have a complaint a minute. Bottom line, episode 2 is actually good, and I want to see what happens next, even though I already know what happens next. Music. I don't have much to say overall so far, as I already really like the soundtrack of the games. This will have to be something I judge at the end of the series, because it's been more of an exercise in, hey, I know this song, or this one is new. I think there's much better songs they could be using as a generic battle theme than Calling, but maybe they'll switch it up later. But how about the OP and ED? Remember when there was supposed to be a new song featuring Ali as the opening theme? Well, not in episode 2. It's Twister, the song everyone thought would be a good OP. And it is. I personally don't even like Twister that much compared to the other songs in the soundtrack, but it's a great choice for an OP. I'm kind of expecting the OP to change to something else in the future, though. On the other hand, the ED did nothing for me. Maybe I'll like it by the end of the series, but right now it's just sort of nothing. Animation. The animation, especially the fights, were the constant between the first 2 episodes. They have been very average so far.
Yes, it's bright and flashy, but so far it hasn't had much substance, it's just looked cool. For me, that's the bare minimum for calling something good combat.
I could do without so much of the slow-mo in them, but overall I think it's a wise choice that the combat has been focusing mostly on physical pin abilities, at least so far. My preferred build when playing the game was blowing up enemies with my mind from the other side of the screen, which would not really look good in animation. Even some of the longer distance pins like Flame have been depicted more like close range attacks. giving the combat some actual amount of physicality and direction. I'm hoping that at some point in the series there's one just really good fight scene that goes all out with 3D animation. Playing here is a clip from Land of the Lustrous. This is one continuous shot for a full minute in an action scene. And I want every 3D show to be this ambitious. Lastly, Reaper Rockers, also known as changes from the source material. You do not find out that 777 is a Reaper until much later in the game, and the tech guy isn't a Reaper at all in the game. However, this is a very insignificant change. The real change is in Day 5, in that Day 5 in the anime was Day 6 in the game, and I was originally delaying this review to see how a show would handle events that, well, actually won't happen till next episode now. I'm not complaining, as getting more characterization for Shiki early on is a very good thing. Speaking of changes, here's one I really liked. How dominating the view at 3 o'clock is depicted is a major potential change for the story going forward. The red skull pins are bad news. This is not a spoiler, it's extremely clear after watching episode 2 that the red skull pins are bad news. But having their negative effects made clear this early on seems to be kickstarting some plot elements much earlier in the game than in the game. Because in the game, there's not immediately orbital death lasers summoned down from completing the mission, which is sort of weird because it seems like that would have been an obvious opportunity to put in a boss fight, and instead this is actually completely added in the anime. So, do I think the future looks bright as the anime continues? Yes. I did not at all after episode 1, but I would have continued to watch anyway, if only to see how Minamoto is portrayed, and what potential alternate ending this show might have from the game. Well, we'll see on that one. I really wish episode 1 was better, because it may have driven off a lot of people from what might be a pretty good show. I'm extremely unlikely to make any more videos about this until it finishes airing, but smash that subscribe button if you want to see more of my videos in the future, I guess. Bye.